Version 5 is finally here, and accompanying it are a plethora of gameplay updates and changes many of us have been eagerly waiting for. To kick off the Natlan update, the first two feature 5 stars are Mualani and Kanish, Hydro and Dendro respectively. For every new expansion, the first 2 or 3 patches will determine Hoyo's direction on what kinds of characters they want to release, and give us a taste of what kind of features they'll have, expectedly pertaining to some amount of power creep. And with Mualani being first, I actually wanted to make a piece talking about the whole situation with her, because I'm curious to see what the ramifications are of version 4's character design direction as we enter version 5. In this case, how it's already caused quite a storm for the very first character of Natlan. I'm not sure whether to call this drama, as it's not really drama, but I do find the situation we're talking about. Consider this a thought piece, if you will. Ever since he came out, Neuvillette took the entire Hydro element by storm, shattering all expectations of a damage dealer and on the one element least perceived to do so. While he might not necessarily be the strongest in terms of pure damage, his combination of area coverage, ease of use, consistency, party flexibility in the sense that he doesn't really need a specific party, and strong numbers make him without question the best DPS in the game generally speaking. If there was anyone who embodied power creep in Genshin, it would be him. Most characters in version 4 followed suit, displaying a measurable increase in terms of baseline power. Not a single 5-star main or sub-DPS from Fontaine came out as anything less than serviceable, even the really niche ones like Milia and Chiori, who by all accounts have excellent potential for future growth. A side effect of Neuvillette's incredible strength, however, is that it resulted in every other character that came after him and Verena to be evaluated far more critically despite their own strengths, because we were exposed to a new ceiling of power and efficiency we haven't seen before. By consequence, virtually every non-support character that came out has since been compared to Neuvillette, even if they didn't share the same comparable niches. Clorinde is strong, but not as strong as Neuvillette. Navia is strong, but she's not on the same level as Neuvillette. These are statements you may have heard once or twice. Heck, even Arlecchino got compared to Neuvillette, and there was a whole debate about whether she's stronger or weaker and all that. As a whole, the version 4 roster featured a noticeable increase in power, and because of that, and I'm sure many players were interested in finding out if there would be another sizable leap in power for version 5. Of course, we only have Mualani to go off of right now, but why that matters is because she would mark the first offensive Hydro unit to come out since Verena. Not just that, but she's a main DPS unit and a Catalyst user, so if there's anyone who players to be comparing directly to Neuvillette, it would be her. On paper, the two are literally in the same exact category. In practice, though, they're about as similar as Navia and Ito being Geo Claymore users. Now, while we have yet to know how important this will be for combat, a running theme with the new characters of Natlan that we've experienced so far is an emphasis on mobility. Katrina has her little spinny top scooter thingamadoohickey that gives her some of the best overall traversability in the game. Kanish has a very dynamic fighting style, making use of a grappling hook to spin around his opponent. Finally, Mualani has the ability to surf on water and lava at remarkable speed, making traveling across any body of liquid a non-issue. With the first 3 characters of Natlan each having their own form of unique mobility, it's debatable as to whether or not they're combat-oriented in the first place. Some have debated that Natlan's units will be more focused on overworld exploration, making it easier to navigate your way through the increasingly more complex environments, alongside the new Saurian pets we have that afford us more ways to travel. But of course, combat is the first thing on a lot of players' minds, and believe it or not, Mualani looks very promising, although in light of recent events, impressions have soured on her a bit. For the uninitiated, characters go through a series of updates during beta development where they tweak stuff around, adjust numbers, and proofread skill descriptions and whatnot. For those wondering how people get their hands on information ahead of time, 99% of it is because of the beta testing server information getting leaked in tandem with data mining and the like. While I don't participate in this myself, you'll find details and stuff being spread all across the internet, whether on Reddit or YouTube or Twitter or Weibo, what have you. From what I've observed, characters go through 5 versions, of which the 5th version is usually the one that gets shipped to live servers. So whenever I or other creators talk about the media or early access server, we're playing out the 5th version, which almost always is a character you're going to be getting as well. When Mualani was first made playable in the beta, people immediately took notice of her numbers, notably how staggering they were. It was quite impressive to say the least. I'm not much of a spreadsheet slave, but even just looking at her parameters and how her skill and bursts play out, the surface level evaluations enough to indicate just how strong she was, and I mean strong. Her elemental skill, as you probably know by now, has her mount her surfboard and floods around whoever she comes across, during which she can periodically attack nearby enemies for HP scaling damage. If she makes physical contact with an enemy, she marks them and gains wave momentum stacks that increase the damage of her periodic attack, and at 3 stacks, you get an empowered basic attack that deals big damage to the marked enemy while simultaneously firing additional missiles to up to 5 nearby marked enemies that deal the same damage as the empowered basic attack, except it decreases based on the number of targets, so the less targets you attack, the more damage it does per target. Initially, the periodic attack you dealt had a base damage of 52% max health, and you could deal 1 bite every 2 seconds. Wave momentum stacks would increase their strength by roughly 13% each, with the super bite doing 39% more damage on top of that. Fast forward to the numbers we have right now, the base damage of her Sharky bites went from 52% down to 15.6%, with the wave momentum damage increase per stack dropping from 13 to 7.8. In exchange, however, she can get a bite off every 1.8 seconds instead of 2, although this is overall a net nerf if it wasn't obvious. As a consolation, Mualani's elemental burst went from a base damage of 84% to over 105. You heard me right, 105, the highest HP scaling single attack to ever exist in Genshin Impact. Remember Mona? Gone. Worthless. Irrelevant. Mualani's now the damage per screenshot queen. I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, we haven't had a Hydro unit with a single instance attack in quite some time, and this one is exceptional. That's all her ultimate does, by the way, it's purely a screen nuke. I mean, it's an insane screen nuke, don't get me wrong, you're probably gonna see forward vaporized Mualani doing damage upwards in the millions with that kind of scaling. As a bonus, one of her passive talents gives you up to an extra 45% more max HP, which means her burst can potentially reach a scaling of 1.5 times her max health. I'm not sure how the conversion would go, but I believe Mualani now holds the title of the highest damaging single attack in the game. I'm fairly certain 150% max HP is higher than Eula's 50-100% attack if you include the 2 times multiplier on forward vape. Overall though, people have been mostly salty about the skill changes to her, which I mean is perfectly understandable, it's a pretty substantial nerf. I asked a couple friends who run calculations, and I think altogether it turns into about a net loss of 15% DPS. Not world shattering, but enough to turn people who were on the fence on getting her away from her. In defense of Mualani, there are 2 important distinctions to make. 1. She's primarily a forward vaporizer if it wasn't obvious. Her damage is spread across an array of burst attacks in concert with her impressive ultimate one-shot capability. So while Neuvillette's more of a consistent attacker, Mualani prefers periodic blasts, almost identical to Navia if you want to think of it like that, where she builds up stacks then shotguns enemies for big chunks of damage. 2. As it stands right now, Mualani's damage even post-nerf is still overkill. So while it's undeniably a nerf in terms of raw numbers, in practice you went from doing like 1.5 times the health bar of an enemy to 1.3 times. You're still well over 1 times the health bar, or in layman's terms, you're still one-shotting enemies. People complaining about Mualani going from 4 million damage to 3.5, but the enemy only has 2 million HP. Beyond that, Neuvillette's more focused on coverage, while Mualani has an inclination towards single target. Not that she has no AoE, she actually isn't too bad at that thanks to her shark missiles, but execution-wise, you have to work a bit harder for that. For people who are trying to compare her to Neuvillette, they're not actually in the same niche, contrary to what their element, weapon type, and role might suggest. That being said, players across various platforms are voicing complaints about the nerfs to Mualani coming off as gratuitous and almost pushing an agenda. You may recall a month or 2 ago there was a quote-unquote nerf to Neuvillette's Hydro Pump where they made the rotation speed fixed, preventing you from doing the hyper DPI spin to win strategy on him and taking advantage of the tick-based rate of attack. To say the community was pissed was an understatement. There was so much backlash in a short time, I believe even more so from Chinese players, that Hoyo issued 10 pulls worth of Primo Gems as compensation and reverted the change shortly after. In fairness, they were absolutely in the wrong to do that. If the DPI thing was a bug as they claimed it to be, it should have been addressed a long time ago since Prevailing Wisdom was well aware of the spin to win strategy within minutes of Neuvillette coming out. So the fact that they were taking it away much later came off suspicious, considering around the time they did it was when Mualani became available for testing. Some conspiracy theories came about where they were quote-unquote nerfing Neuvillette to make Mualani look more appealing, which may or may not have put pressure on Hoyo to nerf Mualani to keep Neuvillette's stonks at all-time highs. No comment on that, but it does raise an interesting question. I feel like if she kept her original stats, then yes, playstyle and role differences aside, she could have been more than a match for Neuvillette, but post-changes, she went from being a no-brainer top tier to a top tier, but only if you have a brain. As mentioned many times, Neuvillette's main strength is not because of his DPS numbers. We've established before that in ideal circumstances, Arlecchino can actually pump out a bit more. What makes him so good though is how easy he is to use. So even if arbitrarily Arlecchino does like 5% more damage, you have to sweaty try hard to achieve that, whereas with the Hydro Sovereign you can mentally AFK and kill everything. That is what cements him in the top spot. Mualani's in a similar position. Even post-nerfs, she's busted, like holy shit she's busted. But she's a significantly more demanding character from a mechanics perspective. What the nerfs basically did was make her harder to play to get the same benefits. Mind you, that is a con. Ease of use or lack thereof is a negative when it comes to picking up a new character, no matter what game you're playing. If you have to jump through more hoops to get the same result, even if the result is higher than someone else, if that someone else is much easier to play, then on average it's more practical to go for them instead. Which brings me to the point of the video. As much as I love Mr. Dr. Professor Hydro Dragon, he set way too high a bar to the point where it's skewing our perceptions of DPS units in a negative way. See, prior to him, every DPS, even the best ones, stayed in their lane and only thrived in their respective niches. I'll hate them was broken as all hell, but he was exclusively Dendro. Child International is broken, but can be challenging to play mechanically. Linny is broken, but also Mono Pyro and a name shot user, so maybe not your cup of tea. Ayaka's broken, but only if you can freeze. Neuvillette is just broken. There's no but. Like I said, he does everything. They made him too general to where he's had a ripple effect on all facets of DPS. Before, you could have multiple characters all be equally strong but in their own respective ways. And while that's still true now, evidenced by people looking at Clorinde and Navia as decent when if they were released back in version 2 or 3 they would be game-breaking, at least to me, shows how much influence Neuvillette has on the game. We're so used to him that whether intentionally or not, he became the new rule. Yeah, he's strong but not Neuvillette levels of strong. Yeah, she's good but not Neuvillette levels of good. I hear these all the time. He's like the Hydro 5-star Shangling. No matter what, you always find yourself using him. Mualani's situation is more or less the same. People have been doom posting about her following her nerfs in the beta, acting like she's a total flop of a character when in reality she's still really freaking overpowered. I go on record to say even post-nerfs, she still power creeps the majority of version 4, but we've been spoiled by Neuvillette for the past year that I believe the Genshin community thinks if a character is not equal in strength to Neuvillette or better, they're not worth it, despite Neuvillette himself being overkill on top of overkill. So if you make someone who power creeps the guy that power creeped everyone else, that's a problem. Natlan's roster being stronger than Fontaine's roster is probably a foregone conclusion. That's just how gacha games are, even one as power creep resistant as Genshin. Right now, I think of Mualani as the Linny of Natlan, because she kind of is. When Linny came out, he was a damn good unit, a fine addition and certainly a top tier character. He was able to compete with all the best units, but with the caveat that you had to run a certain team comp, making him not quite as comfy as the likes of Alhaitham. Sounds exactly like Mualani, where relative to all units that came out prior, she's damn near close to the very top, but it takes work to get her there. A good first unit to release for a new version, because remember we still have Mavuika, and I'm fairly certain Capitano's coming out later this version just like Arlecchino and Wanderer have for version 4 and 3 respectively. So expecting Mualani to be on par with or stronger than the current best DPS in the game, when we still have units like Mavuika and Capitano chilling in the back, and you know for a fact those two are going to be clapping cheeks when they come out, is going to power creep the game way too fast. I'm not saying this because I don't like Mualani, I actually like her a lot. She and Kachina are the only two Natlan units we have so far, so if she gets better Natlan based support for forward Vaporize the same way Farina helped out Neuvillette, we're gonna see some real competition. I say that because of the artifacts and whatnot incentivizing you to pair Natlan units with other Natlan units. All in all, we need to stop looking at Neuvillette as a rule every subsequent DPS has to follow. He was the exception. It sucks that Mualani got nerfed, but that in no way completely invalidates her as a character. If anything, it brought her to a reasonable state. Bear in mind, we're evaluating her on the basis of what we have to work with. There's no telling what kind of units will come out who can buff each other up, and considering, like I said before, Natlan characters being paired up together, there's room for more opportunity and growth for Mualani. For crying out loud, one of her best supports right now is Kachina simply for the matter of there being literally no one else. So to wrap things up, to an extent, it wasn't a mistake to include Neuvillette in the game, but I think it was kind of a mistake to make him so ubiquitous of a character, purely for the sake of keeping unit diversity. The whole situation with Mualani was being interpreted as her going from decent to garbage, when in reality it was her going from absurdly overpowered to borderline overpowered. I don't think we should be expecting everyone to 1v9 the way Neuvillette can. Don't get me wrong, we're at a point where opportunity cost plays a big role in whether or not it's worth pulling for a character, but I don't think everyone needs to become the next Neuvillette henceforth to be worth pulling for. In her current condition, Mualani is a fantastic unit. Were the Hydro Salver not present in the game, we would very much call her the best Hydro DPS in Genshin and a possible top 5 contender. Besides, last I checked, the main problem with Xingqiu for the longest time ever was that we only had one of him. I don't see a problem with 2 giant paint bubbles. What do you guys think about this topic? Do you believe Neuvillette spoiled us too much, or do you think I'm overhyping Mualani? You're welcome to share in the comments down below. For now, if you enjoyed the video, I encourage you to leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Genshin discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.